And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Japan's proposal to discharge more than 1 million tons of contaminated water from the ruined Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station into the ocean off its east coast alarmed international observers, scientists and civic groups last year. Over 1.2 million tons of radioactive wastewater is to be released into the Pacific starting in 2023. That's more than 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of radioactive water spilling into the ocean. The water was used to cool 3 nuclear reactors that melted down 10 years ago when an earthquake and a tsunami tore through the Fukushima compound. And currently stored in tanks at the plant, Japan intends to release the nuclear wastewater after filtering it to remove most of the radioactive content to levels below what you would find in drinking water. But some elements like tritium will remain. Given the concerns surrounding the possible impact on human health, the ocean's ecosystems and the livelihoods of fishermen, Tokyo's decision has been controversial. And this week, with a team from the International Atomic Energy Agency in Tokyo to conduct another assessment, we discussed how the issue has been developing so far. And for this, we're joined by Professor Richard Steiner, founder and director of Oasis Earth, who authored Oasis Earth, Planet in Peril. Very warm welcome to you, and well, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
And well, Dr. Steiner, now an IAEA team is in Japan this week, and they've been reviewing the decision to release Japan's wastewater into the ocean. And of course, they haven't released their findings just yet. But what kind of issues do you expect them to be addressing?
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm glad they're there. The IAEA is a very important organization when it comes to nuclear weapons reduction and reduction of proliferation for weapons. But when it comes to nuclear power plant oversight, monitoring, and safety, they have a pretty checkered record that's not very impressive. They are excessively deferential to governments and the industry. They're essentially, we consider them co-opted by the nuclear power industry, so they are not trusted as an independent voice for nuclear power issues. Having said that, there's 2 very important things they could accomplish this week while they're there. One is either sampling all 1,000 tanks of contaminated radioactive water and then reporting those results, exactly what's in each of the tanks, to the public. And then secondly, and probably the most important thing, is evaluating all of the alternatives for managing this crisis, including the one that's being looked at by TEPCO and the government of Japan, just to dump it in the Pacific Ocean, but also the other alternatives, such as long-term storage, more efficient treatment, and holding it for another 15 to 20 years as the tritium decays. So there are some other alternatives that need to be evaluated technically and costed out, and the public then needs to have those presented.
Well, of course, there have been reviews before, and while organizations like Greenpeace, they said that previous reports didn't really offer an explanation on why the discharge of the treated water into the ocean was an inevitable choice for Japan, and what kind of long-term impact that it might have on the surrounding environment, the marine life. What kind of procedures or improvements would you scientists, the scientific community, like to see before the water is deemed safe for release?
Well, number one, obviously, they need to treat it with best available technology, and they have yet to do that. The Advanced Liquid Processing System, ALPS, that they have in place there is a Hitachi Toshiba technology, a local homegrown Japanese technology. But there are more efficient technologies here in the US with Purolite and Curion that are actually ion exchange systems, modular detritiation systems that can actually get the tritium out of the water, the radioactive tritium out of the water, which ALPS cannot. So there are better processing technologies. They're probably more expensive. They will take more time. But we know the existing system that they have there at TEPCO hasn't worked well. They have to reprocess now most of the water the contaminated water that they've already processed. So we have serious questions about the processing technology. If they hold it and build some more tanks, hold the contaminated water for another 15 years or so, the radioactive tritium level will be cut by more than half. And then over that time, in place some high best available technology treatment standards, and also set up an independent scientific and technical commission to review all of this that's outside of the TEPCO, Government of Japan, IAEA circuit. That would gain a lot of public credibility.
So do you think this all has to do with cost rather than efficiency?
Yeah, I do. I think it's cost. This is a mess. Fukushima is an absolute historic, unprecedented mess, except for potentially Chernobyl. There are no good options. There's only a list of bad options, and we need to make better decisions. We need to select the least bad option. And if it's more costly, then perhaps the G20 or the global community needs to chip in. But we can't just say that the easiest option is to dump it into the Pacific Ocean, where it's going to travel straight across the North Pacific to the US and Canada again. And we're still getting dosed with the initial Fukushima release. That can't be the best option. We've got to make better decisions. And I think cost is a concern, and also the public image of it. Japan's going to suffer some reputational injury if they move forward with this marine discharge plan until the water is as treated as possible to non-detectable levels of these radionuclides.
Then there are scientists on both sides claiming different things. On one side, they support Japan's decision and say it's completely safe. And on the other side, there are lots of concerns by environmentalists, civic groups, scientists such as yourself. So really, there are two obviously very divided sides to this. So, how do you think this should really move forward then? I mean, is there even a middle ground that people can agree on?
I think in these controversial, very complicated scientific and technical issues, such as Fukushima, wastewater discharge, this calls for an independent technical, science and technical commission to be established. And it could be done through the UN or through the government of Japan or some other international body that could then be trusted by the public to come up with its own independent facts and sift through the enormous amount of complicated technical information and then give that to the public and make some recommendations regarding cost benefit of the various alternatives for disposal. It can be injected, the wastewater can be injected into ground faults and evaporation systems. But the best thing to do is to treat it effectively with the technologies we know work. They haven't done that. And then hold it for the amount of time necessary to do that, and allow the radioactivity, some of it to decay, and then slowly release. But they're nowhere near ready to start releasing this next year, which is their plan. So, and the ecological impacts from this could be significant. We know some of them, we don't know all of them, but we know that organically bound tritium and carbon-14, which are in the tanks, become bound within organisms. This would happen across the entire North Pacific and even into the South Pacific and elsewhere. These cause cellular damage, genetic impairment, embryological damage, often sublethal, but they cause damage where you don't obviously see it all the time. But it's a risk that I don't think we deserve to be taking, particularly when there's alternatives. Safer alternatives, and that's what we need to be looking at. So,
well, maybe it's just how vague and abstract it sounds by saying it will be released into the sea. But it seems for now it's just neighbouring countries who are particularly concerned. Locals too, of course, Japanese fishermen, then the South Koreans, the Chinese, and even the Russians and the Taiwanese. Only the surrounding countries seem really worried right now. But how real is the risk of the water spreading beyond Asia and reaching the Pacific, and how fast would it really spread?
Good question. We know it will spread across the North Pacific, which is just where the plume of discharge, of contaminated discharge from the initial accident spread. It spread eastward along the Kuroshio Current into the North Pacific Drift, straight across to the US and Canada. Some went to California, some went past to Canada and here in Alaska. We detected Fukushima radiation in the northern Bering Sea in the Bering Strait. So it will spread. This will behave much the same way. For the marine discharge and marine transport, it's very complicated because there's these ocean gyres and eddies and things that swirl in the open ocean as the current moves across from west to east that complicate the transport of these contaminants. Some of them, during a typhoon system or something, may push the contaminants back to the west of Korea and Japan. We don't know, probably will at points. So we know that this plume, contaminated plume, will travel across the North Pacific. And some of these radionuclides have a half-life of thousands of years. Carbon-14, 5,700 years, meaning it will be in the environment, still detectable for 50,000 years into the future and still being incorporated into organisms in the North Pacific. So let's treat it as well as we can, the wastewater, and then hold it until we're very confident in the public. I understand the fishermen in Japan and in Korea and the NGOs and the public and Fukushima Prefecture and such being concerned about this. They should. We're concerned in the United States. We're a little bit flabbergasted by the Biden administration's endorsement of this plan, but I think that's because of the close ties between Japan and the United States and their funding within the IAEA system as well. So.
Well, certainly it seems that geopolitics is really playing into this, and well, especially as countries like China, with its current geopolitical conflict with the US, may be calling out, calling on Japan to review its decision. It's not going to be, maybe going to be unheard. And well, South Koreans were quite dismayed to hear that, well, to see that the IAEA and the Biden administration seem to be standing behind Japan's decision to do this. So, well, how much influence does Tokyo have over international organizations such as the IAEA? I mean, given the large sums of contributions that it makes to these organizations.
Sure. Both the U.S. contributes about a quarter of the IAEA budget, or up to $200 million a year. Japan contributes around a little bit short of 10%, I believe, which is tens of millions of dollars. Money buys influence, and we know that. There's only about 10 or 15 nations that contribute almost all of the IAEA budget, and it's mostly the nuclear power nations: Germany, France, UK, US, China, Russian Federation, Brazil, and so forth. So those who pay the bills actually assert a lot of influence. But, you know, even if the IAEA comes up and gives a green light to this discharge plan this week or next week or whatever they issue their report later this year, I think people will not necessarily believe it, and it will change little of our attitude because, again, they are not trusted as an independent arbiter or voice in these nuclear power oversight issues. They're an advocate for nuclear power expansion, and so they habitually understate the potential risks and overstate their abilities to manage those risks, and it's just a fact of life. So we need an independent scientific and technical commission appointed to look at these issues, explore all the alternatives, cost them all out, and then present them to the public, and we'll make the most rational choice. But we have to start making better decisions for the oceans and for the planet as a whole.
Well, Japan is known for its brilliance in science and technology, so hopefully we will see more transparency and more efficiency and rationality when it comes to these decisions that affects a lot of human life and the environment as well for years and years and generations to come. And well, thank you very much, Professor Richard Steiner, founder and director of Oasis Earth. We loved having you again, and well, hope you have a happy new year, though it's a bit late.
Thank you very much. 감사합니다.